pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on the agenda is public comment. At this time, I don't believe anybody has signed up to make public comment. Next is the consent agenda. All items under the consent agenda are considered to be routine by the school committee and enacted by one motion unless there is something that anyone would like to be pulled from the consent agenda. Hearing nothing, can I have a motion to accept the consent agenda?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Next on the agenda is number 5, discussion and/or action items. Mount Hope High School Program of Studies as recommended by Superintendent Riley and Principal King.
So Principal King has a short presentation for you. She'll go over the high-level changes. And the document you have in front of you, I just want to remind you, it's draft. So it still has some edits. We're still cleaning up. Some of the course descriptions have to be corrected, and just some general cleanup. So I don't want you to think this is the final copy. We know there's some formatting issues and some other bits in here that still have to be corrected. So there will be some edits still to this document before it goes out. So just, I know some of you reached out to me about that.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. I'm very happy to be here once again to present the draft program of studies for the 2024 school year. As always, I like to say that this program represents and highlights the opportunities and the supports that Mount Hope has to offer in service of creating the most meaningful experience for our students here in Bristol Warren. So I have control, so I don't have to say next slide. So I think what's important is to kind of keep in mind that the work and the revision as we go through a program is always grounded and centered around graduation and getting our students to that point. And this year, it was particularly anchored by our newly adopted secondary regulations, with a goal really of focusing on how do we ensure we provide every student the greatest opportunity to achieve the new requirements at a high level and still provide the greatest degree of flexibility in scheduling, allowing for student choice in coursework. So really just wanted to do sort of set the stage or context for us by a high level view of the new secondary regs and what I kind of look at as 3 focus areas that we really kind of centered our work around. Those include ensuring proficiency for both math and ELA. No surprise there, right? The diploma system, and there are where we see some of the changes in terms of credits, council designation, the real-world relevant proficiency, college and career requirements, and performance-based diploma assessment. And as I go through the highlighted areas in the program, that's where you see those changes reflected, and I'll refer back to. And then the third area of focus I think that's important to note in the secondary regs is student support. Supports for students, which includes continuing to strengthen the individualized learning plan for students, how we now get 6 through 12, and ensuring that it is a living, breathing document that progresses along with students as they progress, as well as in continuing the personalization at the secondary level.
And I'm sorry, Michelle, I'm just going to hold you before you move that
Sure.
slide. And although we've always had the ILP, the 6 through 12 in place, it's really going to grow in importance as there are opportunities for students to meet some of the graduation requirements in 8th grade. So keeping the continuity of that ILP and the integrity of it from 6 through 12 will become really important as students gauge their coursework to see if they're getting to meet all their criteria and credentials. So we've had it in place. I think we could have done a little better alignment work, which now we're working on. We have our counselors all together. We're actually looking at a new
vendors.
ILP system that will help support that 6 through 12 alignment, but it'll gain importance as students are able to use those middle school credits for some of their graduation requirements. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. And I think, the other part of that is really engaging all of the stakeholders in the process. And it's a work in progress, but ensuring that we have, families and students involved, as well as all of our faculty and staff really embracing and helping students support them through that process. Okay, so then I kind of broke it down by changes as it reflects in the secondary regulations. And so I'll kind of refer to page numbers as well. And so what you'll see on page 5 is where we start to look at language around what is currently our portfolio system, or Big 3, and what we anticipate in changes based on the newly adopted secondary regs. And so that language change reflects that we will currently continue to honor our Big 3 presentation through 24, with the anticipation of keeping in accordance with the new regs, a new proficiency or new performance-based assessment or graduation portfolio for the class of 25. And that will involve, again, taking a look at those regs, bringing our stakeholders together, and really looking at what we currently do, what we value and think is important, and what we want to modify, change, or improve upon. And then we added the real world relevant proficiency. And I think of particular note is both in civics and in the financial literacy, which began with 24, is again, our ability to provide the greatest degree of flexibility, allowing students to meet those requirements, not just through coursework, but through other opportunities as well, when we consider ACN, EverFi, and additional opportunities. So we're going to continue to expand how students can meet those requirements without necessarily clogging up the schedule if we don't have to, right? So that's where that is there. I will say, I just want, before I jump into SAT a little bit, we added a couple of things around honor societies. On page 9, we added the Tri-M Music Honor Society. That is new, but it is one additional way in which we can recognize our students' accomplishments and achievements in music. And we added the 10 hours of community service for the Rhode Island Honor Society, which is in keeping with the state standard that is in place currently, which is something we had not had in place, but are now, we are now enforcing. Okay. So proficiency. In celebrating recent achievements in our SAT performance, I think what's important to note here is we will continue to expand upon and strengthen how we utilize our SAT preparation courses, knowing that we use iReady and PSAT 10 data to really inform and drive the decisions on student placement into that coursework. So that coursework is going to continue and serve as our intervention ramp up and additional services for students as we continue to strive for improving our efficiency in both math and ELA. Additionally, something I've been excited and wanted to, I've been sort of kind of advocating for a little bit, and I'm really excited to present that we have in place plans to begin administering the PSAT 9 for all incoming freshmen, starting with the class of 2027. That assessment will be given for in-school, free to students for all freshmen, and it is a great data point, which is directly aligned to our state accountability measure. This data will be used often and very directly to begin to really inform decisions around our needs and gaps as it relates to achievement in ELA and math. So one of the other things we did is we had a pretty, what I would consider to be cumbersome language around the add drop period for courses. It was definitely cumbersome, not concise, probably not very clear either. So we have changed language around honoring course selections, which is on page 11. And we really did this because, we build a student-centered schedule strictly from the ground up. It is built solely on student course selection to student course request. And from there, we assign sections, we assign teachers, resources, et cetera. And so the language we've added is really intended to provide the clarity around that significance of careful consideration and intent when students are choosing coursework, to really ensure that they're making the most informed and intentional decisions around courses, and understanding the way in which we build our schedule is really impacted by those selections. So we thought this addition provided greater clarity and a much better why as to that rationale around the addition or dropping of courses and why that can be challenging. And then one of the things, it was just a formatting. We did move and add our computer science coursework into the freshman year. It was not present in the grade 9 on our computer science pathway. So we just bumped that up. So you'll see that it is offered for grade 9 as well. Okay. So looking at other additional course changes or changes within the program that don't necessarily fall under any particular category. So this is that other column. We took a look at current elective options, and we made some changes within the course offerings within our electives. And again, to speak to choice and flexibility, there were a couple of full year courses that we are starting to modify into semester options for students, again, freeing up some of that schedule space for other electives along the way. The 2 courses impacted at this point are ceramics and guitar 2, both of which were offered as full year courses, will now be offered as semester options. Working with the department in terms of how to address changes within ceramics curriculum, we believe this is going to open up ceramics for a greater number of students and allow for a larger number of students to actually pursue advanced coursework in that field.
And I think just to highlight some discussion that we did have with Mrs. Boyle, who's our Director of Fine Arts, was talking about that full year ceramics will exist as Ceramics 1 and Ceramics 2. So if there's a student who does want the full year and wants to advance to the next, so we'll just break that up.
Correct.
And then there's a next level course.
They have that
still
next
come
step.
into that next level. And I forgot
That's
what
right.
that one was called. It's not called Ceramics 3. It's called something else.
Advanced ceramics.
Advanced ceramics.
Yes.
Thank you. So that will still be in place. So students who are interested in that field can continue to grow and move up the
Right.
kind of gradation of ceramics.
Yeah, so I think that's really an important point to be made because, for some students, it really is just that introduction to the ceramics, but for many, it would be that point at which they decide that's something I want to pursue further, and they have the option to do what currently is in place, but just in 2 semesters rather than as one, again, providing just that choice and that flexibility. And then what we're doing with what currently had existed in our program was Art 1 as sort of the gatekeeper to all of the entry-level art electives. And we've made some adjustments and removed that as a prerequisite, but are sort of retooling it. And we're looking at a name, correct me if I'm wrong, Studio Art will be the new name for this course. Again, an option for students to really explore multiple forms of artwork or art, but it isn't going to necessarily be the gatekeeper anymore for things like painting 1, drawing 1, and those entry-level courses. And again, this really provides our students coming into the high school with a greater degree of flexibility within the art department, really having the opportunity to choose a wider variety of courses early on, potentially sparking interest and leading to additional study in those areas. So we felt that was a nice way of increasing flexibility, but also really increasing student choice. And then lastly, our theater and acting program or coursework. Initially, you'll notice in the program that those courses have been removed from the program. Further discussion, Anna Riley and I, Superintendent Riley, and I spoke, and we've had some discussions and really made the decision to honor the students who are currently in the coursework, and allow them that opportunity to finish and see through what they've started. And so much like we did with robotics, the anticipation is this is a gradual phasing out of these courses at this point. So students who are in will continue to progress through as they've started this program, but will not be starting new students within that program. As I said, very similar and aligned to what we had done with robotics.
And I know we have some like very passionate folks about theater and acting. Our issue with it is we have to grow it. We really have to put some effort into growing theater and acting at the middle school to keep kids engaged and interested so we can have a robust set of offerings at the high school. So I think we have a little back work to do to rebuild this program, because I think we've been hoping every year it would rebuild itself and kids would just come into it and we would get more kids interested and more kids would come. But it's been 6 years and that hasn't happened. So we need to try a different tactic. And so I think it's really rebuilding our middle school program that was at one point a really strong feeder for the high school, so that we can regain kind of that foothold in the program and be able to grow it again. But for now, we just have a very small number of students and multiple sections in one block that we just want to improve those options for kids. And we just don't have the number of kids interested in that course to do that in a better way. We have to grow it.
Yes. There we go. I'll skip a slide. And then lastly, under our pupil personnel and prioritizing special education, changes within this section, you'll notice we have the alternative learning program and our intensive classroom. And in our last program of studies, the alternative learning program was listed along with our intensive classroom. However, as the slide indicates, increasing our rigor, ensuring coursework that's aligned to meet both math and ELA proficiency standards. Students within the ALP program are not students who are on the alternate assessment, and so their coursework would be aligned to their peers in terms of math, ELA, et cetera. And so that has been not pulled out of what we do, but it's not necessarily something that needed to be identified there, that we are working on how we can make sure that we are ensuring our students within that program are receiving the coursework that is designed to meet the secondary regulations. However, our intensive classroom program, which is for students who do qualify for alternate assessment, do require intense modifications to curriculum, and that coursework is in the program that you'll see. So that's why it remains. The other change within our special education programming is you will notice that starting with the class of 27, our incoming grade 9, our resource support class will no longer be bearing the 0.5 credit that it has in the past. And while recognizing that this is a necessary support for students who might have needs within their IEP that identify this, in the absence of the standards that can be assessed for proficiency, it is not a course that we can offer for the 0.5 credit as it is now. And so it, again, a gradual phasing in. So for students who've been in the high school enrolled and it's been part of their planning, there's no penalization there. But for new students coming in, it is in place for our incoming grade 9.
And I'll just say that's not a local decision. That's always what's been required by the state, but we've had a different practice in-house and we're just aligning ourselves to what the expectation is at state level. There's no framework or standards or coursework for either resource support or planning. And so you can't call that a class and give it a grade. So we'll be phasing it out. Those are support classes and are necessary for some students, but they're not credit bearing.
And then just for next steps, right? So next steps, as always, will be to finalize for final review. We will post it digitally on the website and provide it to students and families digitally. We will not be printing hard copies this year. We will do our family presentations both for KMS and Mount Hope. We'll begin the course selection process and then build our schedule according to course selection.
And you'll notice we are a little delayed in this work because if you remember, I brought to the committee in the spring that we would be working with the faculty and staff to recommend a new schedule for next year. And so we are still kind of finalizing what that will look like. So before we can start entering student selections or choosing courses, we have to put that build into the system. So that's why there's just a couple of weeks. If you typically, especially if you have a student at our high school, you're like, oh, usually by now we get the forms and we start doing it. So we're just a little behind as we work to finalize the schedule for next year before we start doing the course selection.
Yeah, the degree to which we are behind has not created any stress or anxiety in me yet, so we're okay.
Good. Well, thank you.
When I start to get additional gray hairs, then we know we're past the point of, but we're still in a good place in terms of building.
Thank you, Principal and Superintendent Riley. Does anybody have questions or comments from the committee?
I have some questions. My first question is about the planning center and the resource. I would like more information. So the incoming freshman class will not have that resource then?
No, they'll have it. It's just that should never have been a credit-bearing course.
So with that, I'm glad to hear that they will be having it.
Yep.
But so what about the students that need the credit? I know many of the students that have participated in that program, they may need the extra credit. It's usually our at-risk students. Do we know or have a plan on how that would be addressed?
So I think it's a really good question. And I think what's important to remember, as Superintendent Riley has stated, for courses that are not following a curriculum or have standards for assessment, we can't, it's just, there's no weight to bear credit for that. That being said, 1,000% the reason why we're starting with grade 9 and not implementing this for all students right now for next year. And absolutely, careful coursework, credit planning is important, and that's part of the school counseling process along with the student and family. And I think when you look at 7 courses within a student's schedule, there's opportunity to earn way more credits than we as an LEA require. So we're not putting students at risk by doing this particular thing. I think the real important point to be made is the careful mapping out of coursework over the 4 years at the high school.
Sorry. One other question: would it make more sense to add a curriculum to that, or to put some kind of assessment or way to assess that system?
I'm going to say not really, but I'll ask you, Dr.
I
Paul,
said
shaking
say
her head, so
Dr.
I'm going to
Paul
let her
shaking her head,
respond
so I'm
since this is her wheelhouse.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think what's important to remember is the reason why that resource class is offered is that it's prescribed and in direct correlation to what's been prescribed in the IEP as having services that are taking place in the other setting, whereby goals that are worked on are those goals prescribed in the IEP. So goals that are prescribed in the IEP are not curricular based. There's no demonstration of proficiency from the perspective of a common curriculum that all kids are working off of. So it would be inconsistent with why you would offer a grade in that respect. And quite honestly, with the amount of increase of students receiving services in the classroom in various subject areas, it would ensure that we are offering a continuum of services, which is what we're required to do under the law. But to what Mrs. King pointed out, with the actual opportunities for credit that students can offer, by not receiving credit, there are other areas where they can earn the maximum number of credits that are required, but also too, it does come down to that careful planning. And it is a change. And I think, we've had conversations about it. I've experienced this work in other districts. And that's why we look to do a gradual implementation so that it doesn't harm current students and that we start with a clean slate, presumably with our next year's 9th grade class.
I had another question about the pathways. So reading this and looking at last year's, it looked like we had 5 pathways last year on page 12. I think it's page 12. There's only 3 listed this time, but in the book, there's actually, they do the other 2. They include the information technology and the bioscience, but it's not listed as a pathway on page
Right,
12.
correct. That would be page 12 and
Yeah.
13.
So I just was curious on why they weren't listed.
So we listed our current accredited CTE pathways, and so that's just the change there, is we just listed those that have been accredited.
And that's going to be really important when it comes to the new regulations, because you only get the workplace experience that will count as their graduation requirement from the accredited programs.
So if we have students that are participating in the other pathways, they don't.
They're credits and they're a pathway
Right.
under our program,
Yes,
but
yes.
they don't get CTE credentials.
And then someone can't come to our district for
Correct.
those.
Correct.
We can only tuition in for these 3
For those
programs.
3
They are
programs.
3 approved by the state.
Okay. And then going on that, if we do not offer, and I'm speaking with some knowledge that the information technology pathway, which is not a certified CTE program or accredited, this year we did not offer the grade 11 class because we didn't have enrollment numbers. So does that mean that the grade 12, the cybersecurity, will be offered next year? Because I would assume you have to take courses to get in, like you have to take the
So currently,
prerequisites?
right, and I will say that currently, I don't believe our teacher is trained and certified in the cybersecurity at this point. Oh, it's the AP class, sorry, I misspoke on that.
So that's why the AP class did not run this year?
That's correct.
So next year, they will still have, so cybersecurity will be offered?
With enrollment numbers, yes.
And then my other question was about the PACE program. So the alternative learning program, the PACE program was put into place to keep those students in our district. And I know that they added.
ALP and
Different.
PACE are not the
Oh,
same.
sorry.
Two
Those are
different programs.
Okay, so then the PACE program, we created the program so that we keep the kids in the district. Last year, it was added to our curriculum. I wanted to know how that was going, if that was successful, like, because that was an addition for last year's program of study, and how has that been doing?
So that wasn't added in the program of studies, but it is
Oh.
certainly a program that has been running. It's probably in its third, this will be its 3rd full year. I'm sorry?
I was gonna say, I think that started before me, because I don't.
Yeah,
it
so
started
that was
in
in response to changes we made with our relationship with East Bay.
Right,
yes.
yes.
And so in its early days, early implementation, it was a modified shortened day program. It has progressed to a full day program where it is still primarily based on an IEP team decision. However, sometimes students minus the IEP can be placed. There are a variety of factors that determine whether or not a student is in that program. It is addressing very specific needs in terms of alternative needs, whether it be atypical, needing an atypical setting, requiring, changes to their schedules. I would say that it's a work in progress. I think we're doing good work. I think that it continues to need shoring up and strengthening.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any questions? Carly?
I have a couple questions. I'll make sure everybody can hear me. Thank you very much. I know that this is a tremendous amount of work and juggling. You had mentioned in your presentation about having a new ILP vendor. I was wondering if you have some more information that you could share with us about that.
I'm sorry, I threw that in there, so I did not mean to subterfuge you.
Oh.
And Dr. Santa has been running that, so maybe she could give you a little
Okay.
update.
this much.
Okay.
Because that's a 6 through 12, so Dr. Sands has
Okay.
been leading.
That would be great if you have it. I would love to hear what the
Sure, I'll just tell you what the current process is. So we have been evaluating the impact of Navance and if it does everything that we want it to do. And there are a few areas where we feel that it could be stronger. So we are taking a step back and we're looking at all of the approved vendors for ILPs, which are on the RIDE website. And so we have a team of counselors that are reviewing that along with our IT department because they're all online systems. And we've had presentations from the different vendors. We have a follow-up presentation coming up with 2 that we want to get more information on. And then we will bring that to the superintendent with a recommendation if we're going to change the ILP program. They all do essentially the same thing, but some are stronger in career exploration or monitoring student progress towards graduation. So we just want to make sure that we have the most up-to-date program available for students, and then we'll, think about the rollout of that and how does it support the changes to the graduation requirements.
Okay. Thank you. I remember having discussions about this with policy and curriculum when curriculum was still part of policy back in the day. Thank you. I have a few more questions. I was hoping you might be able to go into a little more detail around the discussion for changing the Art 1 kind of requirement. I know that's a state thing, but I know I'm sorry, maybe I'm misspeaking. Will you correct me? Not state, but
So the only arts requirement for graduation is that students must be proficient in art, and that accounts for 1 credit of art/music.
Yes, okay.
So in order to broaden the opportunity, so maybe I'm a kiddo who loves to draw, or I really like to paint, but I can't just take painting or drawing. I have to take art. Well, now I already met my credit. Why would I take drawing or painting? I think this is going to open up the opportunity for more students to select more art classes because they can choose something that might be of interest to them versus all being funneled into Art 1. And again, I say this without having a deep knowledge of what our curriculum looks like. And I know we have a very robust Art 1 program, which our staff is going to have to make some adjustments as they work into. So drawing 1, now that we have to have a different set of expectation for kiddos who won't have had that foundational Art 1 class. So we have some shifting to do, but I think in the end, I'm hoping it will get more kids engaged in the arts and more kids interested in taking those higher level art classes because they'll have more of an opportunity to choose things that they like.
thank you. I was just hoping you could kind of explain that to the general kind of public so that people sort of understand what's going on. Sorry about I don't know where I got the state. I was confused.
There's only
That was
one
something
state
else.
requirement, and that's the 1 credit.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to clarify. My last question is more kind of like a comment and some light probing. I'm really disappointed to hear that the theater program doesn't have the enrollment. It's heartbreaking. I know that we come and we talk about this every single year, and there's so many passionate people, and I do see some of our students out, and I know why they're here. And I'm wondering if we are starting to have those conversations about how we can rebuild the program. Are we do we have anybody that's interested at the middle school? What does Dennis Morrell think about this?
We did talk to Mr. Morrell.
You did.
No one was interested. So I think we need to do a little bit broader searching for folks. So if we don't have someone currently on the staff who wants to do it, how can we do a little bit of community work to see if we can pull someone in to do that? Or if we have some parents who are really excited about art and theater and music and would be willing to kind of take this on. So we have to kind of broaden our search for someone who might be interested in leading that program. I know we have 1 new music teacher. Maybe we can broach it with her at the middle school. But we just haven't had success in getting that club back up and running. But that's the hope, is to do a little bit more probing into the community to see if we can get someone who would like to try to recharge, revitalize, and kind of kickstart that program back up at the middle school level.
I'm wondering if that might be something that we could sort of sponsor as a district, to have a community discussion about rebuilding sort of that program. I don't know if I'm just kind of flying, or what's the word?
Flying by the seat of your pants.
Thank you. That's what as far as how we can sort of explore, because I know this is so meaningful for so many other kids that don't necessarily feel like they fit in sports or other sorts of more kind of traditional activities. And this is such a meaningful place for lots of kids. it breaks my heart to see that
Oh,
it's.
absolutely. I mean, absolutely.
So, thank you. I just wanted to kind of start that discussion, the question,
sure.
so, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Reich. Anybody else? Mrs. Bullard?
Following on from what Mrs. Reich said, I was going to say something very similar. I appreciate that the district is giving a little bit of leeway so that the kids that are currently enrolled and who have worked so hard for all of these years, these are kids that did come through the KMS pipeline when it was active. And I'm hoping that it's not just lip service to say we need to get the middle school back up and running and that'll solve all the issues, because one of my biggest concerns is that kids aren't going to miss what doesn't exist. So those coming up now who get here and see the program of studies, which when you're a ninth grader, this is overwhelming to look at. Like it's a big deal. And for parents too, who have a first time high schooler. My big concern is that if that class is not listed in this book, how do you build enrollment?
So it will be listed for the second and like the level 2s and 3s. So the second year, third year, for those that phase out process. So that will be going back in as the plan to phase out happens. So they'll appear, just not the entry levels.
Yeah, I would just hope that maybe there could be some kind of formal commitment to go back to KMS, to really put in the work, to not just to say, let's try to find someone. I would really like to see people putting their money where their mouths are. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Jackson?
Yeah, just following up with the last couple of questions. What's the district gaining by proposing to phase out theater?
Well, I don't think there's a gain, right? I mean, there's no gain there. I think when you look at in its entirety, the enrollment numbers, the integrity of the coursework with multiple levels within the course, it's what's next. I would say that it's not an intent to gain anything.
Right.
And the goal through the decision to phase out is to honor the kids who are currently in there as we do, make a difficult decision. But it is a decision that is based on numbers and, ensuring we're providing a high quality education. And and not that we're not, I don't want it to sound that way, but ensuring that, we're bearing the integrity of the coursework and ensuring the enrollment.
Well, there's essentially 5 syllabi in that one class.
Correct.
I mean, no one is that superhuman. I don't care how good you are. That's 5 syllabi to meet the standards in each of those levels for those students.
And there's no way to rework the program?
We would be running classes with 1 and 2 kids in them. We're
Right,
just
so
not getting
that
kids who are
was gonna be my
signed.
other question, what is the?
The current enrollment semester 1 is 15 students total in all 5 of those courses. And for second semester, I think it's 18.
So
the
for
total.
context, you have acting 1, acting 2, acting 3, actor studio, tech theater 1, tech theater 2, and tech theater 3 enrolled in one period. And that amounts to, for semester 1, I believe it was 15 and 18 for semester 2 or vice versa.
And that's not saying good things aren't happening in that class.
Absolutely not.
I'm not taking away from the
Absolutely
hard
not.
work that's happening in that class and that good things aren't happening. And if you came to the Odd Couple, they did an amazing job. So I'm not taking away from what's happening there, but is that what we want to be offering students? And again, this is a conversation that has been going on every year. We say it's going to grow, we're going to grow, but there's no, to your point, Mrs. Bullard, there's no tangible evidence that anything is happening to grow it. And that's why I'm saying, I think we have to go back to the foundation and grow it for our middle school in order to get back to a place where we can offer, acting as acting and theater as theater and have the courses be robust and have really entry-level kids with entry-level kids and kids who are at sophomore, junior, senior level
Right.
doing a different level of work.
So there's no way to relook at that and maybe eliminate some of the courses? relook at the curriculum, you know what
I
I'm
mean-
saying? As opposed to having 5.
As opposed to having
Acting
acting and
steps.
theater, do we just have technical theater and not acting or vice versa? I mean, we could talk to the department about
Instead
that.
of just eliminating it, that
Yeah.
doesn't seem, I mean,
Well-
there's, you know, the next step shouldn't be, oh, we should just phase it out. It should be,
So-
is there something else we can do to,
So it is an elective
Rework
course,
it.
and we do phase out elective courses that over multiple years don't have enrollment. So this is not an atypical, this is a typical process for courses that don't have enrollment over multiple years. We have other electives that don't have kids enrolled in them. So this is not, we're not doing this just to
No,
theater.
just asking the question, that's why we're here.
That's what it is over time, the enrollment's not growing, but we still keep doing the same thing and running it. So at some point, we have to look at what is the purpose of what we're doing? And what could kids be doing instead of that, where they could get something else out of it? And that part of this, for me, also looms around the fact that theater can be a very robust after-school activity with lots of kids involved, and be able to do that outside of all the requirements that are coming up through the new regs for graduation. Their schedules are going to get squeezed out by the hours that have to be done outside of school that we have to plan for during school time. So I just have to balance that. So if I'm a freshman coming in and I've got to do 20 hours towards my apprenticeship, internship, so that comes out of the schedule. So we have to find places where maybe things don't make sense anymore if lots of kids aren't enrolled. So this is not just about this course. Any course that this has happened to over time, we've just omitted that elective. This one is just, it's one that pulls at people's heartstrings because it is, what did Mrs. Boyle tell me today? A very arts-driven community. And so there's a lot of connection for folks in this community. And so, again, we've been trying to honor it but we're not doing the right things to fix the root cause of the problem. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Do you want to add one thing to that?
Of course.
I wanted just to explain the levels of acting, actor studio, tech theater. We actually at one point had tech theater 1, 2, and 3. Over the last 30 years, some of those courses were added because we had that many kids signing up. At one point, we had a full-time 5 theater classes with a full-time theater teacher. So that's why those are all in that book. Right now, we have students who are coming into intro to theater, and they're going on to acting, and if they go up to the second or the third or the fourth level, it becomes actor studio. So that's why. So right now, I think, and so, and yes, for 6 years, our numbers have been low. And there's have been a lot of extenuating circumstances as to why that has happened. One was a turnover in staff that happened several years in a row, and then COVID. And it's like, I feel like it's the elephant in the room, because all of theater went on for several years. All of our recruiting efforts were non-existent for several years. And the team of kids that are so passionate about this have great plans in mind to go to the middle school, to help us to recruit people. Even last year, our spring musical last year held on by a thread because some of the leads in the musical were being taken off the set the night of the show because of the mandatory COVID testing. So this year is really the first year since COVID that we're up and running. And we did talk about, well, yeah, but even a couple of years before that, our numbers were low, and that is absolutely true. And yes, for 6 years, we've been asking for a chance to rebuild, but I believe 4 of those 6 years, we didn't have a chance to rebuild. Part of me wants to say, I so wholeheartedly agree that going to the middle school, having a great after-school club, building the numbers here, making some more after-school activity as well, just to bring it back, bring the energy back is important. But part of me wants you to say, what harm is there leading into the program of studies and seeing if any freshmen sign up for intro? If we get 20 kids to sign up for intro, then we have that potential to rebuild it. And yes, kids are juggling schedules all over the place, but theater is their lives. That's the one elective they want to be able to do, like somebody might do theater or us or something else. So that would be the only thing I would add to that.
Thank you, Mrs. Boyle. Carly.
I just had one more quick comment and statement. I really want to just acknowledge that this is the first time since I've been on the school committee that we've had an open, honest, really kind of vulnerable discussion in public about what the shortcomings have been as far as theater and building this program. And I think this is the first step, like a first real step where we can rebuild trust with families and community members and our students, that we really do have their best interests at heart. As Mrs. Boyle said, it's been a really tough time for theater too. I mean, we've also lost Bristol Theater Company in that time as well. So I'm sad but hopeful, and I want to publicly say whatever I can do to help do that, please count me in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Reich. Tara?
I just had a follow-up question after listening to everyone's questions. The CTE enrollment numbers, I'm curious on where those, I know that the construction program, this was the first year that we had that as the 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm curious on what our enrollment numbers are for our pathways. Not to put you on the
I would
spot.
say, why don't, I can send those to you. I see Nicole panicking there.
I didn't know if you had, only because it is something that brings, I'm also wondering how
Oh, for
many
sure.
out-of-district students have come to Bristol and Warren.
That one I can tell you.
Okay,
We
for
billed
all-
for tuition today. So we
Okay,
have,
so for the
we have-
3 programs,
currently we have 2 kids, but we are going to do a really good job of advertising this year. And we're going to try to see if we can draw more students in.
and then my third question is, are we looking to expand, obviously not for this program of studies, but is there any plans of expanding some of our programs or making the 2 that are not accredited programs?
So we are working on both of those areas. So I just gave, for Dr. Lyons today, a reminder about 2 electives that fit into our current CTEs, but might encourage more students into the pathways, but we would have to get our teachers trained. So it might be a last minute offering that hasn't made it to this yet, because we have to get staff to agree to want to do the training.
Yep.
But there's one on artificial intelligence, and there's another one on underwater programming and robotics kind of thing that would also fit into our program. So if we have staff who are willing to be trained I think it's at the end of the school year, we could add those. And again, we're just looking for courses that will engage students. And if we get those numbers in to increase our programs, I mean, right now our most successful CTE program is our building program, our construction program. We have a ton of kids in it. Thank you, 96.
Yeah.
So that is our largest program
Okay.
by far.
That's great.
But we have work to do to grow the
How
other
many,
side.
did you have a large number of freshmen
Yes.
sign up for that program? So do you expect, again, my question is, do you think it will become too big where we don't have the staff?
We'll get more staff
For the
and it
next-
becomes bigger.
That will not be, is that a bad problem to
No,
have?
but I know that staff is difficult in that area.
Oh,
yeah.
So I'm just,
We have 2
I'm wondering
full-time
if-
staff right now. They have some room we could continue to grow with where we currently are.
Mm-hmm.
But if it grew beyond that, yes, we would have to look at
Yeah.
more staffing.
no, this is
Construction.
the construction.
Construction and
Construction.
architecture. Anybody else? Mrs. Bullard?
I just wanted to add to what Mrs. Boyle said and say that 15 kids and 18 kids next semester. Each one of those is a student at this school. So the theater is their life, kids, right? They don't want to take another course. They don't want to massage their schedule. This is what they want to do. And yes, there's only 15 of them and 18 of them, but that's 15 and 18 kids.
But they're not in one class. I hear what you're saying, but we're not talking about all 15 are in one class.
Well, maybe we can do what Mr. Jackson said and have a look at how that's.
We could consider, for example, offering it as one elective. There's an acting elective, there's a theater elective versus there are gradations. But that's a conversation. And what does that look like in terms of a course? And what does that look like for kids? I'm not saying it can't happen, but that's a conversation to be
Right.
had that we haven't had yet.
And I think
And we can only go by what we would do for any other course that was in this state. And I hear you, this one has passion attached to it, but it doesn't have to disappear if a course disappears. There are many schools that don't have it as coursework, but have huge, robust
drama programs that meet after school and put on huge, amazing productions. Those exist in many, many places. And so I don't want to take away from that. Like, it's not getting rid of it. It's finding ways to grow it. And some of those ways to grow it might have to be in after-school places until you have a foundation that you can build upon during the school day. That's
Right.
the only.
But I hope that we all know that theater and acting, it's more than just getting on the stage and pointing the spotlight.
Of course.
There is theory. There is, I mean, it is an academic discipline.
Yeah. Yep.
And I know of a good handful of kids who, had they come to Mount Hope and not seen acting or theater in the program of studies, maybe they go to Jacqueline Walsh in Pawtucket, the Performing Arts School. Because if there's nothing here, if that's not here for them, they feel like there's nothing here for them. So they're going to go out of district. And more and more kids are becoming aware of this option. So there's a lot to think about, and it's not just enrollment is low in this class.
Thank you, Mrs. Bullard. I have something to say, and that is sort of to take a step back first. I wanted to, for the sake of the public, to sort of say that the fact that we're having this conversation and voting on the program of studies, to me, is sort of strange. The role and responsibility of the school committee, as laid out by the General Assembly of Rhode Island, is to have oversight over budget, policy, and hiring and evaluating the superintendent. So that this is happening is sort of strange, because the experts in the fields are the ones that should be making this decision. However, having said that, the policy that we have in place says that we do have to have this conversation. And so our job is to, for right or for wrong, look at this program of studies and decide, in my mind, for me, is this the best program of studies to meet our strategic plan and to serve all of our students? Now, I have expressed very openly with the superintendent my feelings on it. I do not want us to have a program of studies that minimizes arts education. That is not a message that I am comfortable with our district sending. 15 and 18 kids, to Mrs. Bullard's point, is not no kids. And I still haven't heard a compelling reason why we have to phase it out rather than see if enrollment improves. Now, I understand that year after year we say this, but 15 sort of is the cutoff that we've sort of always
Per
had.
class, but this
Right.
is 6 classes.
But we can make it one class. If, like, they're using one class block.
But
They're
then
using
they
point-
wouldn't take it for 4 years.
That was the point I was going to make earlier. I
Right.
think we need to understand that students who enroll in acting, who take acting for 4 years at the high school, do so only because we have acting 1, acting 2, acting 3, and actor studio. Students cannot take the same coursework multiple years
Right.
without acceleration, advancement in that coursework. And so those levels are there for a reason. And so if we were to put an acting course into place in one course, then they would have a 1 year or a semester option of that, and they would not be able to follow that for 4 years. And that therein is sort of
And you actually
the
spoke to
dilemma.
that, Mrs. Bullock, because you said it's not just getting on, that's right. And it has to progress from year to year. So that's my difficulty as your educational leader in saying, we're running 6 sections in one block. Nobody can do that. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're Wonder Woman or Superman. That's just doesn't make sense in terms of 2 content areas. Right.
And they do progress every year.
Right. No, that's what I'm saying. That's what we have, but they're all 6 crunched into one.
Because it wouldn't be any different than, let's say, vocal ensemble, where there could be 4 different years of students in the same class. At each level, they have different expectations, and other, we raise the bar each year for what their tests are going to be, what their requirements are. And so that works in several courses, that they all meet, 4 levels meet at the same class time.
Yep.
That happens frequently.
Thank you.
In the music and art department.
Yeah.
Let's just say that with a caveat.
Any other, Again, I think it's odd that we're having this conversation because this should not be something that we're voting on, but that's the job that we've been given and we have to. So that's my feelings on it. Mr. Jackson.
Yeah, I just, a little perplexed like you said, you haven't thought about rebuilding the curriculum so it's not that, I get that, right? The 6 blocks, right? But I don't know, when I was in high school, I took drama for 4 years and it was just one course. And then it advanced each year. You would learn.
That's what we're talking about. It
Right.
progresses year over
Right,
year.
but I'm just saying, like, the 6, can't you rework what that looks like or look into it as opposed to just saying, oh, we should just phase it out because there's not a lot of kids here?
I mean, again, if you want to vote down the program of studies and you want me to rebuild it with theater 1 and acting 1 in it, that supposes a lot of things for next year. Are we going to look at that course the way we look at the other courses? If they don't have a value of 15 per course, we don't run that course. If we would have done that this year, we would be running no theater or acting classes. None of them meet that threshold. So you are setting a requirement and a condition and a standard that we don't do for any other courses. So I just want you to be mindful of that. We don't do that for anything else. I thought what you were asking is rather than have multiple electives, do we just offer one elective that's theater and one elective that's acting? That's completely different, but as Mrs.
Right.
King, you would only take one of them. You don't
Right.
the same
right.
thing multiple times. So that's what we hadn't thought to do. Could we do that? If I had a teacher who was qualified to teach that class and we could build it into a fuller schedule.
I am going to say, unless anybody else I feel like everyone said their piece. Everybody knows where we stand. Is there any other committee member who has anything to say about the program of studies? I'm not going to, we had public comment on it. Just because it's been an hour and we still have another whole presentation to get through. If there are no further questions, can I have a motion to adopt the program of studies for 2024 as presented by Principal King?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All against? Nay.
Nay.
3 against,
6 or 5.
5-4. The motion is passed.
Oh.
3 against.
Karen,
Yes.
Karen isn't here.
You were yes.
So we have 8.
Tara, it's 4 in favor.
and
4 to 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, it failed
Oh.
on 4 to 4.
wasn't loud enough.
No, I thought Mrs. Reach voted for.
Show hands on the nays.
Oh.
How many nays? Please raise your hand.
I'm so conflicted, I'm having a hard time.
How many are in favor? Raise your hands. So 4 to 3 to abstain,
I think I'm going to abstain.
so it passes.
It passes. The motion is passed. Next item on the agenda is our presentation by the school committee attorney, a review of regulations for school committee members. This is sort of a version of our school committee 101 training that we do for every new school committee. Thank you, Mary Ann Carroll.
So, please hold. Principal broke the clicker.
I did, I broke the clicker, I'm really sorry, it fell over the podium. But you know, if you really, yeah, no, it's definitely broken. It's definitely broken. I'm gonna put it right there. Just,
I didn't ask my question, could you already answer?
That's the best way. That's the best way. If the questions are already answered.
Right.
Yes, with a very one-on-one that have no longer works. You can build it.
Diana, did
You have it, you have my slide.
Do they have the presentation?
Oh, the clicker broke, but we don't have it anyway.
Why would it, they need to work?
Oh, it's just not.
All right,
clickers work.
She's like, you're like,
Are we good, Attorney Carroll?
I can wing it if we don't have.
I'll be your clicker if the clicker doesn't work.
Okay.
Careful out there.
Let's try.
Yeah.
Yes, it works. You did it right.
I didn't.
Just something. Okay, so, you all ready?
Yep.
Okay, so, first of all, I think some of you that went to the presentation on Saturday would have gotten some of this. I don't know whether there's anything that was actually repeated. And I say that because I used to do that Saturday morning presentation. I did that hour presentation from a lawyer. I also want to let you know that this presentation has actually been reviewed by several other school committees. Some of the slides are the same as you got 2 years ago, except we try to update it to come up with some current needs that a new committee could have. So, quite frankly, let's hope this works. Again, school committees in Rhode Island are a feature of Rhode Island General Assembly. You exist because of the General Assembly, federal and state law. There are 3 laws that govern what you do. And just to give you a heads up, I don't think you're going to find in any law where you vote on programs of study. So as Nikki said tonight, you know, it's strange that it's coming before you. It's only the superintendent that you vote on, and then if you don't like something that she does, well, then you take it out on the superintendent. But you actually,
That was a little blunt.
all right, don't feel bad, because in the last district Anna was in, I told them I had to fire the superintendent if they didn't like what you did. So in terms of general laws, it's 1629, it's 1629.1, and it's 16.211. And basically, there is, and this slide is not, see what I mean? You did a much better job, Diana. You have it in front of you, and it makes it clearer than looking at the slides. We also sent it to you in a form. So basically, your general powers and duties, the entire care, control, and management of all public school interests of the several cities and towns shall be vested in school committees. So the power is vested in you. I'm not reading the slide. This is 1629. Kate was nice enough to line it up for me, but you have it in front of you, so there's no need for me to read what your jobs are. And there's actually 3 slides that talk about what the law is. Again, you have it, you can read it. Code of Basic Management Principles and Ethical School Standards. I think you probably had some of this the other night, for those, last Saturday, for those of you that went. Again, I'm not going to take time to read the law. It's the law that's printed, and you have a nice clean copy that Diane was nice enough to provide to you. Okay, so sources of authority. In terms of you have the law, and then you have RIDE that gives you sources of authority that's given by the General Assembly in Rhode Island, and they control some school committee actions. So you have the law, but then the General Assembly gives RIDE authority. And basically the authority is for the BEP, the Basic Education Plan. RIDE comes out with additional regulations. RIDE comes out with commissioner advisory opinions. And RIDE comes out with guidance. The guidance is not binding, but I suggest to any school department, if RIDE gives us guidance and we don't follow it, we probably would have an issue. And then RIDE gives us authority for the superintendent of schools. There are 3 main issues that you as a school committee are in charge of. You're in charge of policy, you're in charge of budget, and you're in charge of the superintendent. These are the 3 main functions of a school committee. You'll see if you go back and look through the laws, that when you look through the laws, it'll say, there's a law about you doing curriculum, but it says to develop a policy around curriculum, not decide the curriculum. So again, you're developing policies that have to do with curriculum. You're developing policies that have to do with discipline.
You are developing policies. That's your job. Your job is also budget. You control a lot with what goes on in the school department through your budget. Again, you have a budget, you control the budget. If you don't want something bought or spent or done, then you don't authorize the money. That's how you have your control on a school committee. So it's policy, budget, and then a superintendent. Again, you have the authority to hire and fire a superintendent. You as a school committee hire and fire two entities. You hire and fire the superintendent, and you hire and fire me. Everything else comes through the superintendent. But the superintendent's position and your legal position is your authority, and you're the ones that keep that or lose that. Some tips. And these are all things that we talk about and that you need to understand. You as a school committee must always refer questions and concerns to the superintendent. A school committee member shall not contact individual principals and/or administrators. Everything you do through the superintendent. A school committee member shall not visit schools without notifying the superintendent first. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't go visit the schools. That doesn't mean that as a school committee member, you can't go into the high school, you can't go into the middle school. But the proper procedure and protocol for you to do it is to contact the superintendent. Again, your actions are all supposed to go through the superintendent. And a school committee member is not allowed to interfere in special education matters. That is a really big one, because I think some of you already understand that when you're on the school committee, you're going to get a lot of emails, text messages, and phone calls from parents that may have a special education matter, that may have a concern. Again, as an individual member, the protocol and procedure that you really need to follow is to contact the superintendent and ask her to look into whatever that issue is. You can't control placements of a child. You can't control IEPs of a child. That's none of the issues that you as a school committee can control. And quite frankly, even the superintendent can't do it. It's a special education matter. It has to go through an IEP team. A school committee member has no power. Power comes from a vote of the majority. Individual members of the school committee, you have absolutely no power. Your power comes from a vote of the majority of the school committee. Sometimes I'll get a call from somebody, and let's take a district that has 5 members, and somebody will say to me, I want to do blank blank. I'll say, that's okay, but let's bring it to the school committee, and you gotta have 3 votes. Your actions have to always be by a majority of the school committee. You have no authority any longer on the hiring on personnel. In 2019, the General Assembly established School Accountability Act. From that point on, all personnel come through the superintendent, and in terms of building level appointments, they come through the building principals. So they go to the building, a building principal would recommend to the superintendent a teacher or a teacher aide or social work they would want for their building. Superintendent appoints. Everything under the superintendent appoints. Your power comes in your value of contracts. You as a school committee vote on all contracts. So any power you have about the appointment comes through what are you going to allow in a contract. The school committee hires the superintendent. Superintendent is the COO, Chief Operating Officer of the district. Now, what's your main responsibility as a school committee member? You're recognizing the first and greatest concern, again, that this is law, must be the educational welfare of the students attending public schools. Your responsibility has to be for the children. Tonight, you had quite a discussion about children getting a certain course. It's fine to discuss that. You have to think of the children, but then everything needs to be filtered through the superintendent. And again, the school committee's chain of authority, and I'm sorry because the print is, you should have used yours, Diane. School committee's chain of authority, again, superintendent is the COO. Committee members must interact with the superintendent, not with individual employees. Committee acts through votes and directs the superintendent and legal counsel to take action. The committee may only act through public meetings since individual board members do not have any authority. And what I tried to do on the slides is refer you to the law and the section of the law which says that. And then the next slide, this comes out of your policy, BBAA. And I do want to tell you that in preparing this, because I try to individualize for the school committee that I'm doing the presentation, I reviewed a lot of your policies. And in reviewing a lot of policies, we have a lot of changes and updates we have to make to some policies. So I tried to pull up all your policies and review them and put some of the pertinent information in here. But your policy is very clear, and it's in your policy. The superintendent and staff are not to honor a request made by an individual school committee member if such a request entails preparing a new document or which requires conducting a study or report unless the full committee votes to do so. Again, that's in your policy. And that came from Rhode Island General Law. So process and due process are important. People have a right to a fair and unbiased process. The committee is the body of final appeal to resolve issues in the district, but be cautious not to be tainted by involvement in a matter prior to a hearing. Again, you're going to get calls. At some point, if the superintendent makes a decision and somebody wants to appeal that decision, it comes to the school committee. But don't make any decisions until you hear the full appeal. When you receive a complaint, forward it to the superintendent and or legal counsel, depending on what it is. Now, this is important, especially when it comes to the hiring of a superintendent or the firing of employees. Even though you don't hire employees, the Rhode Island General Law still has you involved in the termination of employees. So even though the superintendent has the authority to hire, if she determines that somebody needs to be terminated for some reason, it would come to the school committee for a hearing and a vote. Disciplining of student cases. If we have cases of student behavior where a student is going to be suspended for more than 10 days, that comes to the school committee. In your district, it comes to a committee that's put together by the chair of the school committee. So last year we had several disciplinary hearings. It was a committee that was put together by the chair to determine that students needed to be suspended for more than 10 days. A superintendent can only suspend for up to 10 days. If a child needs to be suspended for more than 10 days, it has to be a hearing of the school committee. And again, I can't emphasize enough how special education matters. You can listen, you can refer it to the school committee, but special ed has its own due process. If a parent has an objection or a problem with a special ed decision, the parent has the right to go to a mediation, the parent has a right to file a state complaint, the parent has a right to go to due process. All three of those are taken away from the superintendent, they're taken away from the attorney, they're actually taken away from the special ed director because they have their own rights of due process. It's nice to know about it, but we got to remember not to get involved in it.
I'm sorry, and Mary Ann, I'm sorry, can I just add there, like that point is frustrating for parents, and we will get those complaints because they feel like we typically have this chain where they go to the principal, if they're not happy, they go to the student. And it's even difficult for me as a superintendent to say to them, I'm sorry, like I can't help you with this because special ed is governed by federal law. And so I don't get a say in what happens in an IEP team, and neither do all of you. And that's a hard one because typically we're talking about at-risk students who have an IEP. So that is something that happens often, but our hands are tied by the federal laws that bind special ed.
And our state regulations are based on the federal regulations, and unfortunately, there are a lot of things that we have to leave to an IEP team to decide. And remember, that's a team of qualified individuals that know the child. The parent is also on that team. However, a parent may want services that are not required for that child. There's case law in it. I'll tell you how old the case law is when I tell you the comparison. There's a certain case out there that said a parent, a special education child, does not get a Cadillac of services, they get a Chevy of services. So that shows you how it's dated by the two different cars that they use. But it specifically says in the case, they don't get Cadillac of services, we just have to provide the Chevy of services. Doesn't have to be the best program, it has to be a free and appropriate program. Now, I actually gave this presentation and there were media in the room and they didn't like the recommendations that I was giving you having to do with the media. But let me just tell you, we get in trouble when we do make a comment to the media. No comment is always preferred. No matter what you say to the media, they're going to twist it to fit their story. I'll say that in front of a room full of media because I truly believe that. In terms of issues having to do with Bristol Warren, the committee should agree that you'll have one spokesperson on an important issue. And I have to tell you, usually that would be the chair. Public statements by members can be construed as admissions against the district and or the town. We have to be very careful with how we address the media. Best practices. Be careful, and I'm not going to read all this, but just be careful with the media. Be careful what you post. Social media, internet, every Facebook, Instagram, everything that's available now just gets us in trouble. Please be very careful that you don't put something on the media that's construed that you're talking for the full committee. Don't use and again, this is best practices, this is advice, this is not illegal, but don't use your personal accounts to make comments about your school committee business. That's the best advice I can give you. Just be careful. Think before you put something on. Let's move to confidentiality issues. Okay, things that are confidential. Executive session, what happens in executive session is confidential. It should never be shared outside of the room unless you're sharing it or you're asking a question of the superintendent or legal counsel. Personnel matters, they're confidential. You're going to know a lot of things as a member of the school committee that you need to keep confidential. Student matters, ADA matters, FERPA matters, rights of students. If there are certain accommodations or disabilities of a student that you learn about, again, that's confidential. The right student records, FERPA, those are confidential. Medical, confidential. Then we get to negotiations. When we start negotiating, our negotiating happens in executive session. What happens in negotiations is confidential. The negotiating committee will be negotiating contracts. They will come back and fill in the full committee in executive session before or after a school committee meeting. But again, the information that you're given is confidential. Obviously, legal advice is confidential. If I share something with you, if you ask me a question, if I respond, not only is that confidential, it's protected under the access to public records. So emails between me and you or me and anybody cannot be obtained through an APRA request. Emails between you and the superintendent can be obtained, but anything with legal is protected. And if I tell you something, you don't have to in any way divulge it. District and personnel liability. You will be hearing, and right now, I think we're good, anything about liability cases through the trust. Again, we fill you in on that in executive session. It's confidential. And again, special ed matters are confidential. If you give up confidential information, there have been cases where school committee members have been sued personally. So I share with you, make sure you're careful about any executive session confidential matters, that you don't share it. I don't need you being sued. and you don't need yourself being sued. Now let's talk about negotiations, because we're going to be starting a contract pretty soon. Let's talk about the process for negotiations. So the way it starts initially is the superintendent meets with administration teams to develop a draft of a proposal. Superintendent right now is done that, or is doing
Yep,
that, or
it's
it's done.
Today it was done.
Okay. The superintendent then shares that draft with the personnel negotiating committee to review and finalize at a subcommittee meeting. This is an executive session because we're talking about what we're going to ask in negotiations. What is our proposal? After that proposal or recommendation by the superintendent is shared with the executive committee, then there's a meeting scheduled with union's negotiating team and a school committee negotiating team to agree on ground rules, exchanging proposals, and dates for negotiations. What we try to do now is we try to go back and forth with ground rules before we have our first meeting so that we don't waste our first meeting doing ground rules. Ground rules don't normally say when we're going to meet. Ground rules talk about what we're going to share. Ground rules talk about how we have to keep everything confidential. They're pretty basic. We use the same ground rules in just about every NEA district in the state. It's just a matter of agreeing that we're going to use them. Once we agree to ground rules and we share proposals, then we schedule meetings to address the proposals and settle the contract. In terms of working on the contract, again, this is up to the subcommittee of this school committee as to how much they want to be involved in negotiations and how much they want the superintendent and her team to negotiate language. Often what happens is there are language matters that the administration knows about more than the school committee. So there are times when you might say to the superintendent, okay, you go work with the team to talk about the high school schedule. But then you bring it back to the full executive, the subcommittee, so that they can hear about it. When a subcommittee of administration and union meet, they can't do anything final. They can just always meet with the school committee subcommittee to talk about exactly where they're going with certain things. But sometimes it's not bad for the superintendent to talk to the union with a very small group. All meetings of the negotiating process are in executive session. Full committees will be given updates regularly once we get into this process. Nothing is finalized until there is a full vote of the committee. So as subcommittee, the negotiating subcommittee makes recommendations to the full committee as to what you're going to accept as a contract proposal. And again, the full committee is kept abreast of what's going on a regular basis. And that's going to start with the initial meeting on Thursday. We got a schedule. Okay. All right. I say this all the time, and Nikki has kind of taken it back. It's what you need to understand, and this is pretty common. You as a school committee hold a meeting in public. Public has a right to know. We need to have transparency. The public has a right to know what we're doing at a meeting. But a school committee meeting is not a meeting of the public. It's not like we all sit around with the public and have discussions. That's not what a school committee meeting is. School committee meeting is the school committee making decisions and informing the public as spectators at your meeting. Conduct at a school committee meeting. I mean, this is pretty general and pretty common, and I shouldn't be reading it, but obviously it goes without saying, don't be uncivil. Legal questions should be asked at executive session. And if you have questions as to what's going to go on the agenda, it's always better to individually ask either superintendent or legal counsel or both ahead of time so that they can be prepared to answer your question. You need to establish meeting procedures. And some of you when you went on Saturday, I'm sure that you talked an awful lot about open meeting and what you can and can't do. And the most important thing I need you to understand is you can't have a rolling quorum. You've got to be very careful. One of you can't say something to somebody else who says something to somebody else who says something to somebody else who says something to something else. If you kind of like all call and say, what do you think about this and what do you think about this, we could get caught as a rolling quorum. In a previous district that I represented, they got caught doing a rolling quorum when they were talking about what did they think about an issue, and somebody reported it, and the next thing you know, they got fined. So we got to be careful that we don't have rolling quorums. If I send you an email and I send it to everybody, I always say, answer me individually, and then I can answer you individually, but we can't go back and forth as a group. Do not discuss items that are not posted on the agenda. This is when we are having a meeting. In most cases, the agenda may not be amended after 48 hours prior to a school committee meeting. Right now, our law says Diane has to publish our agenda 48 business hours before we have a meeting. So for a Tuesday night meeting, she's got to get it posted by Friday. So today's a Monday night meeting. She had to get it, we started at 7, she had to post by 7 on Thursday. It used to be that we could count weekend days, but that changed a couple of years ago. So it's 48 business hours. Now, you may see the town council say, well, we can do that. Town council's different. They can amend their agenda right at the table during a meeting. School committees cannot. The other thing that we have to be careful of, and I hope that we try to do it, when we're in executive session, we can only talk about items that are supposed to be in executive session. We've been really good about that, and we need to stay good about that because we don't need somebody coming in here starting to ask for APRAs and what we've talked about and things like that. You guys have always run an efficient meeting. That goes without saying. We need to have efficient meetings. We need to limit our discussion to the questions that we're taking. We don't want meetings to run 3 or 4 hours. I think a couple of years ago they were running. I mean, we had some meetings where we had to amend the time. Your policy says 10 o'clock. A couple of times we had to vote to amend that 10 o'clock, and we went on till 11. You were here then, right? So I get tired, you get tired. Who makes any good decision after a couple of hours? So, that hasn't happened in a long time. Let's hope it never happens. And again, the community, when they're here, I mean, everybody's tired. A couple of hours and everybody's tired. All right, let's talk about responding to public under public comments. So public comments are not required on a school committee agenda. We do it so that the public has a right to state their case and make comments to you that you can then refer to the superintendent. You cannot engage in a discussion with members of the public regarding any issues that are not on the agenda. That's just part of the regs. And public comment is not a time to engage in a question and answer dialogue. In your policy as a school committee, you're limited to allowing people to speak for 3 minutes up to 15 minutes. And again, that's in your policy. Now let's talk about subcommittees. You as a committee can establish subcommittees, and you have, and I think at the last meeting, it was determined who would be on all the subcommittees. This says chair, but it's the chair because your policy changed. The chair, with the help of the vice chair, shall appoint up to 4 members of the committee to each subcommittee. The reason we say 4 is we cannot have a quorum, because then when we have a quorum, we have a full meeting. So on any subcommittee, you could have 4 members sit on that subcommittee. I think most of yours, you sit 3, but you could have 4. Subcommittees are advisory. That's all they are. They don't make decisions. All the decisions come from the full committee. Their decision is to refer something to the full committee with the recommendation of that subcommittee. Subcommittee meetings have to be posted, and they have to follow the Rhode Island general law in terms of posting a subcommittee. But because they're advisory to the subcommittee, we now have information that says we don't have to post minutes. Because as a subcommittee, you're simply taking your information and referring it to the full committee. There's actually a decision out of the Attorney General's office that came down last year that said if a subcommittee is advisory, and they are, then minutes don't have to be posted on the Secretary of State's website. Anytime there is a subcommittee meeting, obviously the members have to be there. Other members attend as community members. If you're not on a subcommittee and you go to a subcommittee meeting, you're like a member of the public. In terms of school committee members attending executive session, only the members of that subcommittee can attend executive session. Other members could not be part of an executive session of a subcommittee if you're not on that subcommittee. Okay, going over the duties of the different committee, of different people. So the chair. The chair, with input from the superintendent, prepares the agendas. The chair can bring the vice chair if she so desires. Purpose of the chair is to maintain order and facilitate the meeting. Unless otherwise restricted by committee established regulations, the chair, along with the vice chair, shall have the authority to appoint members to a subcommittee. That you did. The chair retains the right to engage in discussion, offer solutions, questions, and entertain and propose motions, and to vote on all motions. It's not, the chair does not only vote as a tiebreaker. The chair can vote on everything. The chair serves as the authorized signature on all legal documents. The chair may call for a special meeting if it's needed. The chair may serve as the spokesperson for official committee positions, and the chair is the person that oversees the superintendent's evaluation. In terms of vice chair duties, performs all the duties of the chair when the chair was absent, along with the chair appoints members of the subcommittee, sign all contracts in conjunction with the chair. Anytime two signatures are required, it would be the chair and the vice chair. Duties of the secretary. This is according to your policy. We'll read aloud resolutions. Assume duties if chair and vice chair are absent, and fulfills the duties prescribed for clerk of school committees. And the duties of the treasurer, I think the treasurer has the most difficult duties. All it says, according to your policy, is to serve on the budget subcommittee. It doesn't say to chair, but it says work with the superintendent and work with the to prepare for the adoption of a budget. And individual members, you need to show up, you need to participate, you need to participate through discussion with deliberation, debate, and vote. Agenda. Again, the chair, and in your case, the vice chair, meet with the superintendent and are required to develop an agenda. I'm not reading all of the everything that is required with the agenda, but you have it in front of you. Any school committee member can request an item be placed on an agenda. The chair has the final say as to whether the item is appropriate for the agenda. In terms of policies, a new policy or policy amendment may be proposed by committee members or the superintendent. All policy development shall require an analysis that includes clear identification of the problem, relevant data, information and input from sources, statement from financial, if it's appropriate. Make sure your policies align with district stated philosophy and be coherent with state and federal law, local and district policies and regulations. And according to your policy, again, a new policy or policy shall be considered at 2 separate meetings before adoption. Again, this is your policy that's in your, that we actually discussed a couple of meetings ago. All right, let's talk about school improvement team members. Back in 2019, when the Accountability Act was passed, a lot more authority was given to school improvement teams. Your school improvement team members need to be the principal, teachers and educational support staff, department heads if they exist. So we're talking about high school, middle school if they have department heads. Obviously, elementary schools don't have department heads, but it's only where they are. Students, and those would be required from the high school, families, and business and community members. Those are the different people that should be on a school improvement team. And what's their role? Totally consult with the principal, assist the principal with a school improvement plan, a plan that has to be given to the superintendent once a year, which she can then accept or reject, but they have to write the plan and send it to her. They have to have input on their school's budget. They have to identify the educational needs of students. And what was left off here is that they should be advising the school principal on the appointment of staff for the building. And again, there was a lot more responsibility given to a school improvement team in 2019 when the Accountability Act was passed. Procedures for the superintendent's evaluation. Now, let me tell you, I took this from your policy. Your policy, you're already like 3 months behind. Yep. That may be a policy where we want to look at it and just not put dates in as to when something should happen. Because in your policy, between September and October, you should be establishing goals with the superintendent. So the superintendent and the school committee shall establish goals, and that's the personnel subcommittee to do that. In January, you should be meeting with the superintendent to discuss the progress of goals. Again, personnel subcommittee. Needless to say, you're a little late. And then in March, the superintendent's evaluation instrument is distributed to committee members who must return the evaluation within 10 days, and that would be to the chair. The instrument shall relate to the duties and responsibilities of the superintendent and the progress toward establishing goals. This is the full committee who evaluates the superintendent and then sends all of the evaluations to the chair that shall work toward coming up with an evaluation. By April, the school committee is going to discuss the results of the evaluation with the superintendent. The evaluation is submitted to the superintendent, who shall have the opportunity to respond if they disagree with the evaluation. And that is the full committee that would be evaluating the superintendent, would then meet with the superintendent if she has any disagreement with your evaluation. All meetings regarding the superintendent's evaluation are held in executive session unless she chooses to have it in open session. And that was a very quick School Committee 101. Questions? Well, if you have any, you can email me. I'll be more than happy to answer them. I hope a lot of it wasn't duplicative of what you did on Saturday. I tried to put some practical information in this so that you could see what you're doing according to some of your policies.
Thank you, Attorney Carroll. I will give a couple of minutes just in case there's anybody on the committee who has a question. Great. Okay, thank you very much. That wrapping up our business, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.